She had an appointment. Busy just sent me an appointment. She'll send any questions.
That was fun. I see why you like that. It's fun.
The last item, we think, on our agenda today is a report on the progress of CDE supports for underperforming districts and schools. Commish?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, toward the end of the second day, I become the commish.
Still talking to each other.
Which is good.
Yeah, really good.
That's good, yes. So I am going to turn this over to Alyssa Pearson, Peter Sherman, and Nazi Nelson. I always get that wrong. I've known her forever, and I still can't say her last name, so apologies. But they are going to give us a progress report.
What's your first name?
Nazi.
Nazis.
Okay, but see, that was mean because I thought I understood your name to be Nazi, and then today it says Nazanin. That's not fair. They should leave it as Nazi or.
I know. Well, we use the name tags as formal. Nazmo Nell. Yes. Yeah, you're like J-Lo. You're not. You're Nazmo Nell. Okay. Excellent. So yes, we're losing it here.
Nazi.
So.
It's just Nazi.
If we ever had it.
If we ever had it. But anyway, I'll turn it over to you all to give us an update on the CDE supports for underperforming schools.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We will try and keep moving through this because we know you guys have had a long 2 days. Today we wanted to kind of loop back from where we were last January. Last January we took some time and gave you a high-level kind of update on the results that we were seeing for schools that are in some of our more intensive support structures in the Turnaround Network, in Connect for Success, and participating in the school Turnaround Leaders Development Program. So we wanted to come back to you when we had another year of data. We finalized the ratings in December, and so we wanted to bring back to you kind of where we are with those schools and with those supports now. It's really important to us to do that kind of data analysis because we're working off of research what we understand to be best practices for schools and turnaround that need that kind of support, but we want to constantly evaluate what we're doing and learn from that and see what's working and which schools are making progress and which aren't, and so we can best use our resources to really support them. So that's a really core value for us to do. What we have today is a super high level. We're trying to figure out where the resources and the partners that we could find to help us dig deeper because we can look on the surface and see where schools come out on the performance framework, and we've tried to make some comparison groups, and we've done some more qualitative feedback, but we know there's a lot more to learn, so we're trying to figure out what our options are for deeper learning there. But we wanted to at least give you the high level that we have available now so we can talk about things from there. The slides you'll see today are slightly different than what you had in December because we updated with the final SPF rating. So if you see discrepancies in numbers, there's a few places where it changed a little bit with the final ratings. So you might see things a little bit differently. And then finally, we want to wrap up and give you at the end today an update on where we're at with implementing the ESSA plan in terms of school improvement and those funds. You all last year heard some recommendations from the School Improvement Spoke Committee about how CDE could do some more thoughtful and coherent distribution of those funds. And so we've really revamped our process for getting matching needs and support with the resources we have. And so we want to give you an update on where we got with that this year because we're kind of wrapping up a grant cycle right now with that. So we'll do that at the end if you guys are still ready to keep with us on it. This next chart you all have seen before, you've asked us for it. It just is a high-level summary of Turnaround Network, and then Connect for Success, and then School Turnaround Leaders Development Grant, the number of schools that were eligible for it each year, the number that applied, kind of that basic information. So it's just a reference slide for you to have to kind of frame things for today. But we'll go through in that order, talking about Turnaround Network first, and then Connect for Success, and then the School Turnaround Leaders Development Grant. And then we'll wrap up with kind of the update of where we are with the grant.
Go ahead.
Do you have on that page right there the percentage of money that is allocated to schools in these areas that are the federal funds and the state funds?
Percent of the
total of
Of-
those schools?
Of the school's budget or of the?
Yes. Specifically in though, if I looked at the turnaround and
Yep.
Connect for Success, that chunk that's federal funds,
Yeah. So I'm trying to think, I'd have to go look and see if on the financial literacy website, if we have the actual school's budget, and then we could do a calculation
or these
of it.
schools all combined, I don't need individual
Yep.
schools. What I'm saying is.
What
if-
percentage of the,
Yeah, of their total budget comes from the feds and from the state.
okay. We'll have to do some digging in to see if we can figure that out.
It's a hard thing to do, there's no rush.
I'll talk to Jennifer Oaks and see what we can come up, because these grants are all kind of competitive or discretionary, so there's federal funds, you know, right? The Title I that they all get, and then these are on top of that, and they're intended to be supplemental, right? I mean, Title I's intended to
Well,
be
it might be
supplemental
nice
too,
to have
but,
both of those
Yeah.
broken out.
Okay.
For these low areas, because a lot of people say all the money goes there, and I want to know if all the money goes there.
okay. Okay, we'll do some research and see what we can
Okay,
pull up.
thanks.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Peter now to dig in on the turnaround network with you all.
Good afternoon. So we're in the 4th year of the Turnaround Network right now. This is a 3-year engagement. Just to remind you that it's a support that's really designed to help catalyze some quick and sustained changes in schools, but also to help build districts' capacity in that work. We utilize a small grants, somewhere between $30,000 and $70,000 per school. We also use a performance management model, and we focus in sort of 4 major areas around culture, leadership, talent, and academics. The network has grown to include 41 schools at this point from 12 different districts. These schools serve over 21,000 students and have high percentages in free and reduced lunch and special education and English language learners. The network participants engage in a number of different activities that I'll talk more about a little bit later, but we have network convenings, we have targeted professional learnings for principal supervisors, and we offer Bright Spot school visits. We'll share some data today about the Turnaround Network as measured by the school performance frameworks, by evaluations and survey data, and then some anecdotal information. And as Alyssa said, these are fairly high-level looks at some of the data. There we go. So when we look at the school performance frameworks, we see some mixed performance. We group the network by cohorts, depending on when they began. For example, cohort 1 consisted of 9 schools, and that was the first group that started in 2014. So this graph shows the school performance framework ratings for each of the cohort schools in the network. Just to remind you, the red represents a turnaround rating, the orange priority improvement, yellow improvement, and green performance rating. And the gray vertical lines that you may be able to see indicate when the network services began. So it separates the historical or benchmark or baseline data from the performance after engaging in the network. Cohort 1 included 9 schools, and we've seen the most dramatic gains in that group. Prior to engaging the network, all of those schools were on the accountability clock with priority improvement or turnaround rating. 7 of those schools have made some sustained improvements and remain in improvement or performance. Cohort 2 includes 15 schools and have seen some moderate gains. Cohort 3 includes 10 schools, and as you can see, there have been fluctuations in that data. And cohort 4 includes 16 schools. A number of them have made improvements over the last 2 years. We don't necessarily attribute that change in rating to the network because of when they began, but we do believe that the leaders that are in place are the right folks that will be able to sustain some of those changes. So as you can see from this data, it's not, we've seen some gains and there's some bright spots there. It's not all that we want it to be. We'd certainly like to see this be stronger than it is. These next 3 slides show some comparison data between the cohorts that I just referenced and non-network schools. So the comparison groups include schools that were in priority improvement and turnaround at the same time. They may be AECs, they may be schools that had insufficient data, but they exclude other schools that were receiving federal grant supports as well, because we didn't want to compare to other to those groups. So the comparison group for cohort 1 has 90 schools. And I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but if you have questions, please. Cohort 2 has a number of schools that are still on the clock, and that comparison group has 74 schools total. And cohort 3 had a comparison group of 74 schools as well. So in reflection from these data slides, What we found with these schools that are still in turnaround and priority improvement, a couple of our conclusions. Many of those have experienced some sort of leadership change at the school in the midst of their efforts, and we know that, you'll hear me say the word leadership a number of times today, but we know how critical that is and how a change in leadership can be very disruptive. A lot of those districts, the context in which those schools work and operate, lack some consistent and coherent support. So the districts are all in various stages of how they're supporting their lowest performing schools. But I would say that that's a factor in those schools that are still in the clock. And then also the principal supervisors are another factor, and we work with those folks closely, but I would say that inconsistent practices there or implementation of different practices and how they're supporting their principals has been a factor in a number of these schools. The network's designed to provide support and will continue to do so in all of those areas, but those are some of the trends that we've seen in the schools that are still on the clock. This slide illustrates annual survey responses from surveys that we do to our participants around the major network activities. So we hold Bright Spots visits each year. These are where we bring folks from network schools to other higher performing schools to really highlight practices and demonstrate some of the exceptional practices that are happening out there. These visits are face-to-face and in-person visits, and we find that the response is very valuable. We'll have held 10 of these this year with over 100 attendees. We hold all-day convenings, 4 or 5 of these a year for principals, principal supervisors, and building leadership teams. These are professional learning experiences. They include topics around planning, performance management practices, improving school culture, human capital, and we always have something around sharing problems of practice. Our performance management sessions are on-site quarterly visits to schools where our CDE staff are facilitating conversations between principals and their supervisors around the prioritized needs that they've established. And then we also have annual reviews where we give more summative analyses of the progress of the schools. As you've read on this slide, the evaluation survey data reveals participant views and implementation of activities of the network. Some of the pieces that have been called out here around more specific and frequent instructional observation and feedback is happening in the schools, performance management and progress monitoring practices, community and parent engagement has been increased in a number of schools. There's generally more reflection on practice, more intentional collaborative planning time, and more frequent data meetings. So we acknowledge, as Alyssa was saying, that our data and evaluation gives us a surface level view of the network and the impact of the network. It's not exactly what we want it to be yet, but we know from observing and from working in these schools that there are a lot of practices that are occurring that we had not seen in the beginning of the service, and we believe that those are really high leverage practices that we see. Survey responses and our observations also reveal other ways that we can improve the network, and some of these areas include support with strategic budgeting and resource allocation tools. We're developing tools and resources and partnerships to try to support this, both for network grants and for state funds. Talent management is a critical area, so we're developing tools and resources. We've begun to offer a series of professional learning around recruitment and hiring of staff to really help districts and schools bring in the right people for the right time at schools and districts. We're partnering with a number of outside organizations as well as with the Education and Talent Office here at CDE on this. Leadership is critical. We're looking for all sorts of different ways to develop leadership. We're also trying to align this more with the School Turnaround Leaders Development Grant, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then around system improvement, we're working with district teams to try to help them build the capacity around some of the major areas of their academics, their talent, their leadership, and their governance. This slide just has some comments that have been brought out from some of our surveys. There are a lot more. We've certainly heard and seen some very positive feedback. All of the districts that are engaged in the network have renewed or added more schools over the last couple of years. So we also take that as a positive sign. So I'll pass the mic over to Nazi Mosier-Nelson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Do I have your permission to start?
Go for it.
Thank you. So the Connect for Success and the Turnaround Network have a lot of similarities, whereas Turnaround Network is a lot more supported and intensive supports from CDE. Connect for Success has a lot of similar approaches, but the difference being that the Connect for Success grant was started on a premise that if we can identify exemplary practices that have been implemented by Colorado high-performing schools, then those schools and the leaders within those schools can provide mentorship and role modeling for other schools that they've been connected with. So the difference being that the supports and the connections and the work that's being done is happening between high-performing schools and then their counterparts that they're mentoring. The project was a two-phase project that was introduced based on, over the years, as we work with schools and districts, we would often get the question, who is doing this well in Colorado? We know what the research says about what are effective practices, but where can we go to see it in action? Where can we see this type of strategies having an impact on Colorado students within Colorado contexts? So then
with similar demographics?
With similar demographics, thank you. So what we did was we identified 5 elementary schools, and we started with the elementary level first. We identified 5 elementary schools who had had really good success for 3 consecutive years based on the performance of their English learners, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged students, and students that are minorities from major races and ethnicities. And then what we did was we went in and studied those schools, conducted a comprehensive study of the strategies that they were doing that contributed to their success. We interviewed principals and assistant principals, instructional leaders, school staff, district personnel, and tried to get a full picture of what their strategies were. It did not come as a surprise to anybody that the strategies that we found were centered around effective leadership, assessment for learning, climate and culture, effective instructional practices. But what did come across loud and clear across all 5 schools was the consistency and the constancy with which that they were implementing the strategies that they'd identified as their key initiatives within that school. So we took that message of the consistency and constancy of implementation, and we created a grant opportunity for schools to apply to participate in the Connect for Success grant, wherein they would get to meet high-achieving schools, go visit them, learn from them. CDE conducts a visit, and we look for the areas of alignment, that their practices are very similar to the high-achieving schools, but they might not be as consistently and constantly implementing those strategies. We provide an implementation manager that works with all of the schools, and as part of the grant opportunity, they're required to use part of their funds or provide from their own funds an implementation manager at the school who helps them stay focused on implementing the key initiatives that they've selected. We've had a total of 28 grantees. The first half year, they get $20,000. That $20,000 supports their trips to the high-achieving schools. It supports their other activities where they engage with the high-achieving schools, and pays for their travel plans. So those 28 schools that have applied and have been funded we've provided a description of the schools so that you know who they are and where they're located. And what we have are some very highly impacted schools that participated. The 28 grantees that have been networking with the high-achieving schools in composite have a higher percentage of English learners at 45% than the state average. Same thing for free and reduced lunch. The schools have an average of 82% free and reduced lunch. Students with disabilities at 12% rate, which is also higher than the state. And they have 82% minority students, which is also much higher than the state rate. They are all Title I schools, and they are very highly impacted, and had been 100% of them were on the clock when they applied for the grant. The gray line on these slides, just like with the Turnaround Network, represents the distinction between their data prior to the grant and then when their grant activities began. So as you can see, in both cohorts, 100% of the schools were on the clock or priority improvement and turnaround before they initiated any of the grant activities. The bar immediately to the right of the gray line represents their implementation year and their connection year. So this is the year that they spent learning from the high achieving schools. Some of them came back and immediately were able to start implementing changes in their schools based on what they saw being happening in the high achieving schools. They learned and started implementing things right away. Others took that first half of a year to fully plan what they're going to do and how they're going to change their strategies and their practices. So for cohort 1, they've had 1 full year of implementation so far, and as you can see, we have no schools out of the 20 that are left on that are in earned a turnaround rating in 2017. We still have 35% of them that are on priority improvement, but they are currently in their 2nd year of implementation, and we look forward to seeing how they perform in 2018. Based on their progress monitoring and quarterly reports, we're very hopeful that they're going to continue to have success. Cohort 2, the 2017 data represents their data after the first half year. It's too soon to make any determinations based on any of this data, but we did want to give you this progress report and share this with you. And then we also wanted to show you, because a lot of our schools are continuing to improve regardless of whether they participate in these particular supports or not, because they're engaging in a lot of different activities and having reforms and strategies that the district is providing, outside vendors are providing. So we wanted to show you, of the schools that were eligible for these supports and services, the top left bars represent the ones that participated, the bottom right hand represent the ones that did not participate but were eligible for it. So we continue to progress monitor all of their performance and compare it to each other. And as you can see, again, although the comparison group continues to have 42% of their schools on the clock, the cohort 1 schools have dropped down to only 35% of their schools being on the clock. So we're seeing progress in the right direction, but certainly not as significant as we would hope. And we're continuing to work with those schools and support them. We provided the cohort 2 comparison data just for informational purposes, but again, this is only after 1/2 of year of an implementation. The next slide shares with you at a very high level, some of the practices that we've seen changed and approached using the funds within this program. And what we see is that 17 out of the 20 cohort 1 schools really focused in on their instructional practices, having a very strong multi-tiered system of supports, and building capacity of their personnel by aligning their professional learning opportunities, their PLCs, their collaboration time, and their structures to support their teachers aligned to what the high achieving schools were doing with their professional learning. We are continuing to observe and monitor and follow these schools, and we're doing more qualitative analyses of the progress reports that they've provided to us. We're doing interviews to find out what has been helpful and what's been working, what they're continuing to struggle with, and we're also in the process of identifying a 2nd round of high achieving schools. As you might recall, you last summer recognized the 5 high achieving elementary schools. So we're in the process of identifying middle schools and high schools that can be role models and mentors for secondary schools that are having similar demographics but having struggles with the disaggregated groups and their performance. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Hello again. So I just want to provide you with an update on the School Turnaround Leaders Development Program. I'm going to call it the STLD because it's far fewer syllables. So as a reminder, the STLD is a state-funded grant program that's designed to identify leadership development providers and grant folks from districts and schools to attend those. The idea is to have a lot more individuals in Colorado being trained in various different programs. It's specifically for priority improvement and turnaround schools or those that are directly supporting those. Again, it's our state-funded grant.
So, Mr. Sherman, just let me clarify for myself. We have this program, then we also have a state leadership program.
No,
No.
this would be the same.
This is the same. This is it. This is the only program that we have at the state level for improving school leadership.
It's the,
Yes.
it's the grant that's focused on priority improvement and turnaround schools from the state. And it's focused on that improvement through leadership.
Okay. And there's
Yeah.
not another,
No, perhaps what you're thinking is that there were two sides to this grant where we identified providers, organizations that provide the leadership training, and then we had separate RFPs and grants for districts and schools to send people to attend those programs.
so I thought there was something like an academy. Did I make that up? I made that up.
Well, you may be confusing too, just what Mr. Sherman went through at the beginning, that we have the turnaround leadership, like, network, and that's the network. It all reflects leadership development, but this is more specific for people.
For at-risk.
Yeah.
Okay.
But some focus on schools and districts, and leadership is one of the components we talk about in that network. This one is more focused on leaders
Thank you.
developing their
Sorry,
capacity.
I
No
don't
problem.
know.
No, and statute specifically calls out, as Commissioner said, that this program is specifically for schools in turnaround or priority improvement status.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So this is just a high level. We've currently have 5 identified leadership training providers with 9 different programs amongst them. To date, since the inception of this program, which was in 2014, 256 individuals have participated. This graph shows how those 256 are distributed by the 5 different leadership providers. And then the next graph going along, the same 256 individuals that have participated, this graph shows how they're distributed from the different districts and charter schools from which they came. There were 21 different districts or charter schools that all of these folks have come from.
Mr. Sherman, can we match the improvement with these specific programs where these teachers came
Leaders.
from?
Leaders. We're talking about leaders now.
Where these leaders came from?
Just to clarify, so the program was designed such that a broad spectrum of individuals with different roles could participate. So we do have teacher leaders that participate. We have assistant principals and principals, as well as district staff that are directly supporting those schools. So you're all correct. Everything about is correct.
So I'm looking specifically at the turnaround
Yes.
schools and the ones that have improved. I mean, I'm looking at that and saying, if you looked at who those leader-teacher people are, could you say 80% of the ones that improved the most attended one of these?
Right. It's a great question, and it's one that we do continue to struggle to answer in that there's a lot of lag time and between the individuals that attend these programs and the impact of that training that they have. Some of our programs are 1 year long, some are longer. And sometimes, of course, those individuals move around, and they may be serving in one school when they initiate a program, but perhaps they're in a different role 1 or 2 years later. So we have struggled with tracking the participation in the programs to the student outcomes as based in test scores.
So are they allowed to choose where they go? Is it up to the individual? It just seems like the two that get the most people. I'm just wondering if we can.
In terms of the different providers?
Yeah.
Absolutely, they choose. This is done through a application process, and districts and charter schools apply for individuals, and we encourage them and share information about all of the provider programs so that we absolutely want that to be the right match.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Is there a cost difference in those providers?
Yes, there are. They each have their own tuition rates. There are different levels of engagement as well, of numbers of hours that they're engaged. So their tuition reflects that. I don't have those numbers with you right now, but we certainly have it all posted on our website, and I can be sure that you have that.
It looks like the bulk of them are DU and Relay.
Yeah, I would say that, yes, that's true. And the DU program, the Turnaround Success Program, is, that particular program is a little less committing in terms of time, so more individuals have been able to go through that. Relay has been, is a year-long program, or about 13 months, and I would say that that's probably, a lot of folks have selected that, and it's probably a much more engaged program, just in that it's a more larger time commitment.
Does it cost more?
It does than the turnaround support program, yes.
In the report, one of the documents you have with this item is the evaluation report to the Colorado Legislature of the grant program, and in Appendix C, it's got each provider and kind of the approximate program cost for it. So
how
that's-
much is the DU?
So the
Turnaround success.
Denver, it depends. University of Denver, it looks at like 32,000 to 35,000 per person for one of their programs, 45,000 per school for one of their other programs. They do some kind of customized support with schools if they want to do it kind of a whole school approach, right? Am I saying that right?
Correct.
And then Relay's got a few different programs, and they range from $20,000 per person to $8,500 per person. So it depends on kind of the intensity.
Are there degrees or certificates or endorsements or anything that come out of these, since they are higher ed programs?
The DU program, one of the programs I believe that folks can earn a master's degree from, but not in general. We don't have a state endorsement for turnaround leadership particularly. It's something that's been discussed, but we don't have that right now.
Board Member Messer.
I'm just wondering too, what kind of success do you feel like we're having, both in impacting the schools that are in turnaround and priority improvement, and particularly when you're talking about that leadership changes. I mean, everybody can relate to that. You know, there's these many leaders going to this training, but next year they move to a different state or a different school. Everything's different.
Through this program, we do ask districts to really ensure that the folks that the individuals that they're putting forward in grant applications, that those are individuals that the districts are investing in. That there are people that will stay in their schools, or that we have a lot of conversations with districts where they say, we want to train this individual with the intention of moving that person into a principal role at a low performing school. Maybe
how do you feel like that's worked out so far? I mean,
you know, we have seen a lot through the Turnaround Network, and I would imagine through Connect for Success. We see a lot of people that have gone through these various programs, and I certainly see the value add. We don't track individuals and their exact positions, so that's a challenging thing for us to track. But it's a great question.
That's an area where, you know, we can do this surface level look, but if we can figure out some partners to help us do a deeper evaluation and really look at where people are, and if we have the data systems to be able to do that, those are questions that we'd like to be able to answer. They're just really challenging to do right now and pretty time intensive to collect the individuals, find them in the HR system, find where they are, do all of that mapping.
it's a
And
lot.
so, yeah.
It's a lot of grant money.
But it is exactly,
a
that's
lot
the,
of investment.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where
And
we're trying
DU
to
has a
figure
lot
out.
of
where-
And
grad
it's hard to
students.
know what the return on investment is.
DU
So-
has plenty of grad students that,
Yeah, and so
maybe-
that's where we're starting to investigate. Are there some research, higher ed organizations that have some capacity to do some evaluation in partnership with us on behalf here? So it's something we'll want to talk with you all further about, though, to see if you're supportive of going that route, because it's student data, using student data to look
that's
at.
true.
What's the percentage of the dollars that go to these leaders? All of the dollars that go to these programs here that go on the rural areas as opposed to the larger school districts? Do we have such a thing?
So
Yeah.
there's $1.9 million that are allocated each year for the STLD program. What we can do some quick math on the numbers of rural districts that are on this particular slide.
Are we talking about 30%, 50%?
I think it looks like about 50%
Yeah.
went to
Yeah.
Aurora and DPS.
I'm sorry, it was.
Yeah, I would
was
say it's
trying to
probably
fix
about
that.
50%, Board Member Rankin, but that's a ballpark.
You think 50% for rural?
Yes.
What, we'll get back to you.
Smaller rural?
We can pull the numbers and look,
Because it
We've
looks
got
like
the-
50% went to Aurora and DPS.
in terms of
Yeah.
numbers or participants. So I
That's
think
what
we
it
need to look at, we've got in the full report each district and the amount of money they each got, so we can just classify that by rural versus urban, suburban, and get you those numbers.
So I think this question of the impact and the return on investment is a great question. It's one that we ponder. The report that we were provided with, in the past we've just generated annual reports. This report is a summative report of the program to date, so there's a lot of, I think, good information in there about participation and around the financials, so just to note that. As Alyssa was saying, I think the evaluation of this has been challenging. It's a time-intensive program to be able to evaluate and really analyze. There are some, similar to the network, there are a lot of activities and practices that we're seeing from folks that participate in this, and some of those are around really increased observation and feedback, around data-driven leadership, around strategic planning, performance management. Some of these are activities that we know to be high leverage in low-performing systems that are really critical. We're also seeing districts that are applying for this grant over years where they are starting to layer. So they're saying, well, maybe one year there's a cadre of principals that are going through. The next year there are district staff and assistant principals. So they're really, I think, seeing a sort of sandwiching the leadership training that folks are getting so that it becomes more systemic in the schools and the districts, which I think is critical. Some of the areas that we think can be strengthened, just very quickly, really increasing our integration of this training with some of the other support structures that we have, identifying additional providers, which we will do through an RFI that will go out soon, but there won't be any more design grants, which we had in the very beginning of the program by statute. We seek to engage with more BOCES and districts, and through the EASY application, there are another additional 50 schools that we think will be awarded and be able to participate in this. And as we've said explicitly, we want to improve our evaluation and analysis of the program. Okay. So looking forward, I'd like to summarize for all of us some of the things that we've learned about supporting schools and districts in low performance, trying to take a step back. We know that it's really difficult work, but we've seen some amazing gains across the state. The work that's happening out in our districts and our schools is pretty inspiring and incredible, and I think all of us here at CD have been impressed by what we've seen. We provide a number of different supports, whether they're grants, technical assistance, some of these more intensive support structures, and a lot of different offices are coordinating those supports from across the department. We also partner with external organizations in a number of different ways. So as we synthesize what we've learned over the past few years, a couple of, I think, unique roles that the state agency can and should play are some of these high leverage focus areas. So around exemplars and bright spots, both Nazi and I have spoken about that, really bringing folks to other schools and districts with similar demographics and contexts so that we can connect peer-to-peer learning experiences. The district systems development, so I always think about it as we're trying to work ourselves out of a job, that we want to really help districts be able to think about their systems and how to differentiate their support. So it's our role to provide resources and hold them accountable, but also to really develop that capacity building. Leadership development is such a critical factor. I think that's something that's infused in all of our supports, and it's something that we all know to be incredibly important. We find it's not always the amount of money that matters, but how those are allocated and the strategic use of those. As you've heard, both of our support structures offer relatively small grants as opposed to some of the larger grants in the past. We think that that's the right approach, and we think that we've seen a lot of districts really utilize those smaller grants to leverage the kinds of changes that they think they need. And then also the 4 domains for rapid improvement from the Center on School Turnaround. You've heard about some of those from us: culture shift, academics, talent, and leadership. Those are sort of big buckets of areas, but we find that we are working across the department to try to standardize and align some of our supports and our language with them. The more coherent we can be at the department, I think we find that that will benefit the districts in their work as well. Undoubtedly, there's more to learn, and there's more that we need to know around the impacts and the return on investment of the work that we're doing. I think we are all very interested in that, and we all want to know that the work that we are doing is having an impact on students and on the adults in our system. So we'll continue to do that as time goes on. All right, forgive my graphic slide, but we've been doing a lot to reshape our support structures, and I wanted to walk you through a couple of pieces. So first, the ESSA School Improvement Spoke Committee that met last fall and through the spring. One of the ideas that emerged out of that was to the idea of having a more consolidated grant application and process for consolidating our supports and our grants. So what emerged out of that was a single application, which you may know as we call the EASY, or the ESSA application for school improvement. That EASY is over the last 6 months, it's a process and an application that's been developed by many offices here. A ton of hours of work have gone into it. But the idea that rather than have multiple grants in the past where districts have had to apply to 5, 6, 7 different grants, they now have one application. The EASY application went out in October and it closed in December, and we're in the process of reviewing those right now with the hope of getting award information out to districts in the coming week or two. So it's been a big hurdle, but I think one that we're all really proud of, and we think will really streamline the work that the supports that we'll be able to do for districts. The idea is to really match their specific needs with the supports and grants and resources that we have. There's also an opportunity through the EASY to not just say, what does CDE offer, but what are you all doing out there? So there's a strand around district design and led initiatives that many districts out there are doing, and so there was a way for districts to be able to apply through EASY for grant funds to be able to continue or initiate new projects in their own districts.
Can I just jump in a second?
Please.
We had a review meeting on Monday afternoon, and it was one of like the highlights of my time at CDE, because we had people from across the department that were working with our high need schools and districts, and we were able to be in the same room and talk about an application and say, oh, I've been working with the school. I know this is something they've been struggling with. They're applying for that. That seems to meet their needs. But we know this about them too, so let's make sure we take that into consideration. And then how do we have a conversation with the district after we've pulled all of this together to communicate with them of what we're seeing as the needs and where we're seeing this being good fits. It was just, we've been really trying to think about how do we leverage what we have internally, the expertise that we have internally and the experiences we have internally of working with different schools and districts so that we're aligned and doing it in one place instead of helping in multiple places, because we really believe if we do that, then we'll help the districts because they won't hear 5 different things from us. And we'll be able to really help them focus, and we'll also focus ourselves and build up our own capacity that way. So I was so amazed to see how far teams had gotten at being able to pull this whole process together, and that the culminating factor of being able to have those conversations was exactly what we were intending to go into. So I just wanted to share that with you because I'm so grateful for all the staff here that put in so much time to make that reality happen. And really it was like this big jump of just doing something so differently and so quickly. We had to just jump in and knew it wasn't going to be perfect, but just try, and everybody just went, it was so far and beyond what I ever expected we would be able to do. So I had to take the time to say that.
Did the staff do the needs assessment? Did the district themselves do their needs assessment?
The application, so there were a number of different routes through the application, but in most cases we asked them as part of the application to describe what their needs were and the root causes that they determined. In a lot of cases and then also
you
if
already
they
knew.
Pardon?
In a lot of cases you probably already knew.
If we were working.
That's right. And then if districts had or schools had external reviews done in the last couple of years, we asked them to reference those, of course.
When I got as far as that, the EASY looked good. When I got to the menu, I got kind of stuck. Now, is the menu of supports a list that CDE has that CDE recommends, or is this where the school has said this is what they need and you're saying no they don't? that menu there I'm confused with.
Great, thank you for the question. I just hadn't gotten to that.
Oh,
But the menu of supports what we issued with the application, because we needed to say, well, what's on the menu? What can you apply for? So it's really a continuum, anywhere from exploring, saying we know we have a problem, but we're not sure what it is, so we need a diagnostic process, and we might need money for that, to we know what we need, or we have a pretty good idea, and we need some very intensive engagement with Connect for Success or the network. Or we need consultation. We've been identified for targeted assistance because of some of our special education gaps. And so we know that we need consultation, for example, say in special education or English language learners or a variety of other areas. So we need a lighter form of consultation. So that menu has a continuum of different things that it offers. And then as I mentioned earlier, it also includes what are you all doing in the district? We may not have the solution that you need. So there was a big section for districts to submit, again, new or continuing initiatives that they have around district designed and led programs.
So Mr. Sherman, thank you for that, but I'm still a little confused. If I started and applied for that diagnostic review, turnaround network, Connect, if I applied there and then went through the single application, then came down to the menu, do I have more flexibility with you working together to figure out what we're going to do on that menu? Or as a district, are they limited to those choices, and then you have to fit what you think in those choices?
Sure. The menu is really embedded in the EASY. So filling out the EASY application is sort of going through that menu. But I do believe there's more flexibility within this process than we've had in the past.
I kind of see that when you go and put all the money together, but I find it interesting because it leads me to believe CDE is going to have more questions and connection with these districts than they've had before. So it's going to be a win-win working together more. Am I?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
And I also think what we're already starting to do is say, okay, what's EASY 2.0 and what's the next revision of this menu? And we know that there are certain areas that we don't have a lot to offer in that we know some schools and districts need. And so I think what'll happen over the next 6 to 8 months is we really start to flesh that out and think about other ways that we can support folks.
Thank you.
We'll also go through an evaluation process of this. We'll survey, we haven't designed this yet, but we'll survey the districts that applied or that were eligible and may not have applied. So we really want to get feedback from them about how was this, both on a technical level but on a strategic level as well. Great. The last slide is really just a timeline of that EASY application, so I'll let you look at that. But we hope this presentation today has been helpful to inform you about some of the supports that we have and some of our thinking about the next steps. Again, it's critical to us that the resources, people, time, and money that we're putting in are supporting the folks out in the field and really helping kids have better experiences. So we hope that it's informed you, and welcome your questions, your further questions.
Board Member McClellan.
I thank you so much for this presentation. I've very much appreciated getting data on all of the successes that the department has had moving schools off the clock with implementation. So any communication of success stories that you have, I enjoy sharing those with constituents so that they can better understand what their Department of Education does for their community. So thank you. If you have success stories that you can share in some quantitative way that's easy for us to share, I think it helps people understand the department better.
In our communications department, you've probably seen us put together a number of promising practices videos, which I know are posted on our website, and I think some of those are wonderful stories. I mean, I think they're all wonderful stories, but some of them really highlight some of these schools that we've worked with.
Board Member Rankin.
I'd like to go back to page 21, if we might, for just a minute. We're talking about, for lack of a better term, going from a big chunk of red in 2016 and no red in 2017, and 35% have moved up a spot in the ratings, on the final ratings. These must be new results that we're having. Yeah. And these are schools. If I picked out that 35% in the red 2016, I mean, it looks like we really have improved a lot. So that's this is the same schools from 2016 to 2017, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so, and how many schools are in that one? I'm sure it's there somewhere.
It's 20 schools that began the program,
Okay.
and then by that, the bar that's in the
Is the
2017 is the
2015
20, it's the same schools being represented across all three of those
Okay.
years.
Then we should be able to, at this time, take those schools and have their test scores.
Yes,
And our test scores should correlate with the direction this is going.
yes.
Have we done that?
Yes, ma'am, we have, and they do. So
Can
we've
we, when we see these types of reports to us and are saying how great we do, if we could have that even underneath, you know, not necessarily the grade levels, just the school as a whole, I would like to see some of that and see the dynamics of the movement in some of these.
So you would want to see, for example, the mean scale scores of the schools
However you do
on
it.
English language arts
just
as
so
they've
it's
moved
and
across the
math,
time,
yeah,
and math.
just the big
Sure.
chunks, yeah.
Absolutely, we can do that.
Thank you.
Board Member Goff?
Thank you. Just curious, I know the date on, it's typical for a lot of our reports due to the legislature, the House Ed committees or Senate Ed committees, typical to have them in January of each year. And it may be early yet, has there been any response, reaction, follow-up questions, confusion?
No, we haven't heard anything back.
Okay,
Excellent.
actually, I have a general curiosity about that for any of these reports. I think it'd be, it's interesting to know, would be nice to know,
Yeah.
frankly, how the response rate is, or follow-up rate, you know, and that's within the control of legislators primarily.
Yeah.
But if ever there's any information available,
Yeah, if we get feedback, we can definitely share that with you all.
thank you.
So I have just a comment to make. One of my frustrations, I think, with some of the West Ed stuff is that it's just survey feedback. I can't quite figure out, can they not tie a response to a district and how much success they've had? In other words, some connection, because this doesn't tell me a lot as to whether the impression that they reflect actually ties to implementation success. I think next time we ask them to do that, that they could get a little.
Yeah, we're working on
outcomes-based.
how we can do that, what West Ed can do versus some of the RELs or the higher ed institutes. It's different. Like West Ed is not, they've got limitations on the kind of data analysis and evaluation role that they play. Some other organizations have more of that role. So that's where we're trying to figure out who are the best partners for the different components that we need.
Yeah, I think it could be a
Yeah.
little more robust,
Yeah,
in my
absolutely.
opinion. And this is over and over again?
Yeah.
Sort of the same thing, so I worry about whether it's really worth
Okay,
the investment and time and providing information, et cetera.
that's
And I
helpful
think
feedback.
they go out to the various staff people across the state to get this input, right? So there's time invested by our educators too. I'd like it to give us a
Yeah.
little more,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Thank you. Any other comments, questions about the report?
May I
Thank you,
provide a
thank you.
clarifying comment back to Board Member Rankin?
Sure.
So one of the reasons we didn't include the student level analyses on here is because of the change in assessments. So we will graph that out for you and show it to the best that we can, given the changes in assessments. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that.
Thank you very much. I know we've been asking for this for some time. Sorry we kept putting it off, but I realize it's terrific. All right, next item is future business. The last item we need to cover today is a resolution recognizing the contribution of Pam Masnick has made to the education of children in Colorado. Board Member Durham. please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I think Ms. Masnick's prepared remarks yesterday really demonstrated her intellect and her commitment to this process and to trying to serve Colorado's school children. So I'm pleased to have the opportunity to read this resolution. Whereas Ms. Masnick has served in the State Board of Education since January of 2013, and whereas Ms. Masnick's passion for education began during her experience as serving as PTO president and volunteering in the classroom and in sports booster clubs during her children's years in the Douglas County School District, and whereas during her term of service, she served as director of Great Choice Douglas County, a nonprofit organization supporting school choice, and whereas Ms. Masnick, along with the board as a whole, selected Katie Anthus as Commissioner of Education in 2016, and whereas throughout her years of service on the board, Ms. Masnick has been a strong advocate for school choice and allowing parents to direct education funds to schools that best fit their children's needs, and whereas Ms. Masnick strongly believes in the importance of improving civics education in Colorado and supports the addition of civics in the Colorado state standards, and whereas Ms. Masnick has supported the protection of private property, the protection of privacy rights of children and parents, and whereas with a congressional region that covers almost a third of the state, Ms. Masnick has been a champion for rural districts and innovative school practices to further support smaller districts in Colorado. And whereas Ms. Masnick has the loveliest singing voice that could turn even this resolution into a beautiful aria, and whereas over the course of her service, the state of Colorado has undergone tremendous education reforms, including the Colorado READ Act, the Student Data Privacy Act, implementation of the accountability clock, and standards review and revision process. She, along with the board of the whole, has supported the department's ongoing efforts to implement Colorado's education reform agenda. Therefore, be it resolved that the Colorado State Board of Education formally recognizes Pam Masnick for her 5 years of dedicated service to the children of the state of Colorado through her service on the State Board of Education, dated this 11th day of January 2018.
Oh my goodness.
This is your thoughts.
Thank you. Oh, wow.
That is cool.
I'm afraid to take it out too. Yes. Beautiful.
Don't sit down, I'm moving your chair. Come on, kids. Oh.
Down there?
Down there? Maybe before all the pictures, we'll
Sure.
deliver these to you as well. Ma'am,
Yes.
these are from the department, CBE staff, exec team, and the whole department.
Smell great.
Yeah. Keep it away from us.
Do you want to have the clock down there or no?
I don't know how I'm gonna do all this.
Maybe you can have some assistance. If you
Get some help.
hold some stuff.
Yeah.
I'll hold the clock.
Okay.
I may drop it.
Please don't drop
Yeah,
it.
please don't drop it. Okay. I'll drop it.
All right, guys. I'm gonna ask you to get cozy. Can we switch? Actually, can we have you be in the middle? Yep, perfect. There we go. All right. So I'm gonna have you all just kind of face in. Perfect. And then there we go. All right, I'm gonna take a few. Ready? 1, 2. And I'm gonna do set with the flash.
that's what you meant. Yeah. That's all. Oh, should I adjourn? Can I adjourn if you have to say something?
Don't hit the clock. She said, don't hit me.
Yeah, don't hit the clock.
The symbolism would be pretty profound.
Killing time.
We're adjourned. This meeting is adjourned.